Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We talk with researchers and interesting people about unlocking the mysteries of human behavior.
Welcome to part 2 of our conversation with Paul Bloom. If you are hearing this without first listening to part 1, no, you can do that. This episode can stand on its own. But there may be a few references that you may not get. There might be some background that we talk to. So it might be good to just stop this right now and go listen to part 1. However, if you want to be a nonconformist and just get some of that meaty topic that we're going to discuss in this episode, by all means, go ahead. Go. Just listen. Just keep listening.
Well, okay, but just as a quick recap, in episode 1, we did talk about the history of psychology and the impact of some of the most famous contributors to the field, like Freud and
how Skinner really didn't have an influence.
Yeah, minimal impact. But in this episode, I just want to say that in this episode, we're going to focus on going to explore how Paul's latest book came about. We're going to talk about the concept of selfish versus altruistic behaviors and their root causes. And we're going to talk about the nature versus nurture debate in a really, really cool way. We might even settle it. It's possible.
Maybe.
We talk a little bit about universals versus individual, in terms of, concepts and ideas and actions. Language. Oh, fun conversation about language. And what makes a good life. Yeah.
See, now, if just for that last comment there, what makes a good life, you should listen. You got to listen to understand what makes a good life, because this episode could change your life, folks. There you go. Listen to what makes a good life, and you can go forward having the happiest, best life you could ever have. So pretty robust episode, if I say so myself.
Okay, so we won't belabor the introduction. Let's just ask our listeners to sit back with that second glass of insight and continue to enjoy our conversation with Paul Bloom.
Listeners, we are talking with Paul Bloom about his new book, Psych, the story of the human mind. And it is just a fascinating. First off, I want to get a little bit more into the book, because we've been talking some big esoteric questions here. But can you tell us a little bit about, you talked a little bit at the beginning about how the book is structured, but you have some really, the ape that speaks, hearts and minds. You kind of bring in a whole variety, as we talked about. This covers a lot of ground. How did you start and kind of build the book, and what are you trying to accomplish with it?
Yeah, I love teaching psychology, and I've taught it in classes, taught at Yale, University of Toronto. I have an online course on Coursera where we teach psychology, and has like over 1 million students subscribe right now. But there are limits to what you could do in a class, just basically the limits of time and the limits of detail. So I wanted to tell the whole story. And I wanted to make it the equivalent of have everything you would get from a good textbook, but also in a way that, I hate textbooks. I hate reading them. You couldn't pay me to write them. So I wanted to be the kind of thing where, you could sit down and read while you're waiting at a bar for your date to come by. And maybe if I do it right, you'll let your date come by and you'll just keep on reading and keep your head down and everything. My fondest hope
might just walk by if they see you reading Psych. That might be
that's true.
I don't want to go there. So
that's my fondest hope is that people prefer my book over true relationships. One of the interesting things about psychology is that you can't stay in your own lane. So I don't know what it's like to write a book about biochemistry or French architecture. But at least for this field, psychology slumps into so many other things. So when I talk about about consciousness, I'm knee-deep into philosophy and anthropology and other fields. And the brain connects to neuroscience, of course. Language connects to linguistics. Reasoning connects to game theory and behavioral economics, and so on and so forth. Individual differences cuts into behavioral genetics, as well as studies about human environments and some degree of studies of history and sociology. And for me, this is fun. But if somebody says, I read your book on psychology and was distressed to find so much of other disciplines. And then I'd say, well, that's what psychology is.
You talk in the book about evolution of some of our traits, and that the selfish variant really should be the thing that gets passed on. And yet these beliefs and behaviors around kindness and love and gratitude and friendships that really don't seem to fit with selfishness keep coming back. keep hitting they keep making the top 40. Can you talk a little bit about that?
There's a set of things about the mind that are these great mysteries that people slam away on. One is, how can a physical thing like a brain be intelligent? And that's actually one we've licked. We have computers. We know it can be done. We know you could wire up physical things in such a way that they could play chess and carry on conversations and navigate through space. And we also know how neurons in the brain can do these sort of computations. There's a lot to be done, but we know how physical things to be conscious, could be intelligent. Then there's consciousness. How can physical things be conscious? That's a killer. That's a real killer. And that's something which we're struggling on. We've learned a lot about consciousness. I don't think we know that answer to that one. Then there's the one you raised, which is, how can a creature that evolved through natural selection, Darwinian natural selection, which simply works on survival and reproduction, lead to entities like us who are pretty nice in some ways, who help out? And I know some people think it can't be done. They think the existence of our niceness means God must intervene and put something special into our souls, because otherwise, how do you explain our niceness? I think there are better answers. I think a close look at how evolution works gives some surprises. So for instance, anybody who thinks evolution shapes people to be purely selfish, I think often Ayn Rand would talk that way, saying the most natural biology is pure selfishness. That's not how biology works. Biology works on survival and reproduction. So at minimum, I should care about myself, but I should also care about my kin, my children, my grandchildren, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles. You have a range of it. Natural selection actually does something very cool, which is it creates animals for whom the distinction between self and other is just a matter of degree, not a matter of kind. Now that's part of it. That's what they call kin selection, being kind to your kin. Then there's reciprocal altruism, this stuff, lovely stuff of game theory and so on. And the idea is, maybe you and I are not related, but if I help you, maybe you capture some big game and we need to drag it back to camp, but you can't do it by yourself, so I do it with you. And then after that, you agree to share with me what you found. Suppose you and I have kids together, and it's such a big deal raising kids. So when I'm sick, you raise my kids, and when you're sick, I raise yours. There's mutual benefit to this. And animals, including humans, arise from that. And I think stuff like that is a partial answer to the mystery you raised about the origin of kindness. Then there's the real tough stuff. I bet the four of us at different times have given to charities or helped people in faraway lands. Maybe some of us abstain from eating meat. Maybe we care about global warming. All these things that might have no immediate consequence to us or those we love or those who are friends, but we have an abstract sense of kindness. And that's really cool. And I think there the story gets more complicated. I think the story is that evolution has bequeathed us not only with these sort of moral instincts, but also with an intelligence. And we could apply these intelligence to take us places we would have never gone before.
Yeah. In the book, I'm going to quote you here. It says, there's a rich irony here. It turns out that the best explanation of our finest instincts, love, gratitude, friendship, and esteem, can only persist if we have feelings such as anger and resentment. And I found that was just, when I thought about that, it's really great. And it brings me back to the sweet spot, right? What you talk about within that book. But can you expand on that and just kind of, because I think it's just such a interesting concept that we can't have good without maybe some of this other aspect going on.
It is a deep insight. I could brag about it because it's not mine. I think you find it in purest form in Adam Smith, but also by many evolutionary theorists afterwards. And the idea is this: suppose we're in a community. You could imagine a community and hunter-gatherer community. Imagine we live in a house together, and we all do our cleaning, and we all do our cleaning and our chores. And then a mutant comes in. Suppose I'm the mutant. I have played the mutant once in my life in graduate school. And I like having a clean house. I benefit from the clean house. I don't do any cleaning myself. I leave my food out and so on. Well, this is not a good setup. Each of the three of you think you're at a disadvantage relative to me, who has a lot more fun, a lot more time. So you stop cleaning, and sooner or later it all goes to hell. And so what do we do? That's a metaphor for real life. As soon as somebody comes in who takes the benefit, who gives his kids for other people to watch, but doesn't watch other people's kids, who eats the big game when it comes in, but doesn't help hunt, everything falls apart because that person has an advantage. The twist then is another thing that has evolved, and this is with both humans and non-humans, is if you could have some way to make the bastard pay. Some degree where you shun me, you beat up on me, you do something to me that hurts, all of a sudden it's no longer in my interest to be a free rider. And so all sorts of animals work that way. There's these clever naturalistic experiments where vampire bats drop into a cave and they fill their mouths up with blood because they've been to a horse or something. And then they drop droplets of blood into everybody in the cave. Very cooperative. So what you do is you get a vampire bat, you keep him from giving blood to the other people in the cave. They're all looking at him like, dude, you have all this blood in your mouth. We're really hungry. What are you doing? And then the next day when they bring blood, they shun the first one and start to do that. Yeah. And humans do that too. Try being the guy who never buys the round when in the bar. And sooner or later, your friends will twig on and you won't get invited anymore. Yeah. Or they will pointedly bring beer to the table, but not for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We monitor everything. And these are like toy examples. But in general, without some urge to say, hey, you're not doing your share. We don't like you. Kindness couldn't evolve.
So in the book, you also address the nature versus nurture question. And it's interesting to me that, we've talked about this with other guests, other researchers, and there's sort of this, God, is there still actually a question? Like when you're teaching this,
yeah.
Is there sort of a head-scratching moment like, oh, we have no idea? No. Do you really feel like you're answering the question nature versus nurture in class? And maybe, of course, you should weigh in for our listeners to let them know your thoughts about this.
The nature versus nurture question is how much of what we are is due to our genes, what we start off with, and how much is due to our experience. And there's a reflexive claim some people make that, oh, we don't talk about that question anymore. It's all interaction. There's no nature-nurture problem. But if you think about it, that can't be right.
No.
People walk into class and they have different color eyes. Mm-hmm. And putting aside contact lenses, that's kind of nature. They got it from their parents. They come in and they know English. Well, that's pretty much nurture. You don't know English unless you heard English. Now, a lot of things are combinations. You see the power of nature, you see the power of nurture. But I think these are two different forces, and one can entangle them. And one can even, when it comes to individual differences, you could do the math to entangle them pretty carefully. So I could predict how tall each one of you is if I know how tall your biological mother and biological father is, even if they didn't raise you. It's not 100%. It's nowhere near 100% actually, but it's a good guess. Very tall people have very tall children. So we can do the math and figure out what percentage of the variance in height among people is due to this biological factor. And then the rest of it is due to the variance that you get due to random chance, to how much you eat, to what you do to your body, and so on. And it's true for other things too. I can guess pretty well how introverted you are, how many years of school you will go through, how aggressive you are by testing your biological parents on those traits, even if they never raise you, because it's terrible, and call that nature. The rest is nurture. And in some cases, there's a lot of nature and a little bit of nurture. In some cases, there's a little bit of nature and a lot of nurture. And so that's the study of individual differences works that way. And I don't think you get anywhere by putting yourself in the bizarre position of denying that some things come from the environment and some things don't. Yeah. I mean, I know the plot of all the John Wick movies. To deny that that's nurture to say, oh no, and that's nature in some way. And this is not nature. It's nature that I have the capacity to go to movies and whatever. But the knowledge itself has a specific origin. I could tell you exactly when I picked up the knowledge for all of this. On the other hand, my crawling behavior, the color of my eyes, a lot of that's just nature.
Yeah. And I learned from John Wick, you just don't mess with people's dogs. That's what I'm just going to say from there. You just don't mess with people's.
That's a bit of knowledge you were not born with.
I was not born with that knowledge. I learned that knowledge from the John Wick movies. There you go. In the book, you have a section on differences. So you started talking about these differences, right? And you state, and I love this line as well. You say, only scientists thinking like scientists care about universals. Most of the time, we are interested in how individuals are different. And then you bring up an interesting story from Noam regarding frogs to demonstrate this. Yeah. So can you elaborate on that story for our listeners, and then just on the concept in general?
Yeah. So I see this in my own life. My own research is about universals. I'm interested in morality, why we think about morality one way or another, general views, general ideas about how we think about identity, what we like. I'm sensitive to differences, but I don't really care that much why one person's like one way or like one person's another way. But people care. People care. You know, the way I put it is, if I told my friend, oh, I'm going to fix you up with somebody, and my friend says, oh, you know, what's she like? And I say, well, you know, she has a neocortex and a medulla. She when she gets very hungry, no food, she gets hungry and wants to eat. If you, she speaks using nouns and verbs. And she's like, no, I don't care. Tell me what makes her her. And the Chomsky line is that frogs, if they could think about such things, wouldn't run around saying, I wonder what we all have in common. It's like, what makes this frog different from that frog?
Yeah.
So we're obsessed with differences because we go in the world and we interact with all sorts of people. And I got to know whether if I'm interacting with somebody, are they going to be nice or are they going to be a jerk? Mm. Sometimes we select people. Who do I want to date? Who do I want to hire? Who do I want to, you know, I'm stepping onto a bus. Do I sit there or do I sit there?
Yeah.
And we want to figure out differences. And so a lot of psychologists are interested in what makes people psychologically different. And in different ways, we could be psychologically different, you know, and there are many ways. Most men are sexually attracted primarily to women. Most women sexually attracted primarily to men. This is the biggest sex difference there is. But I don't need to tell anybody in this world, there are a lot of exceptions. A lot of men are turned on by men, a lot of women by women, a lot of men by both, a lot of women by both. And some people have sexual interests that don't fall into any of these simple categories. People see themselves as male or female, but sometimes they see themselves as bi, or they see themselves in a different way. Some people are, take a funny distinction. I'm married to somebody who the term maximizer applies, where she just has to get the best and everything. It's why she married me.
Because you're a satisficer?
I'm a satisficer.
Because he maximized her opportunity. There you go.
The point of the punchline is she waited for the very best person till she found me.
I totally missed that.
She will explain to me she's not always a maximizer, and sometimes she's got to choose in a hurry. But she's she stares at the menu and finds the best meal. I stare at the menu and say, I'll have the pasta. And just put it down. Whatever. And these people differ in all manners of life. I tell the story when we first lived together in Toronto, how she spent 6 months looking for the perfect chair, for a chair in a room. And it was a small apartment, so the chair is not, we needed a chair. And on the one hand, maximizers, not surprisingly, do very well in their choices. On the other hand, they're sometimes not as happy as the rest of us because they have to spend 6 months without a chair. And so, the trick, by the way, to life is to be a minimizer married to a maximizer who then chooses all the best things while you go in your sloppy minimizing ways. People differ in their personalities. People differ in their criminality. People differ, and it's a big one, how happy they are, which is a topic at the end of the book.
Yeah. I have to just say, I'm just sorry that I just totally missed that that joke. I totally missed where it was going. But also, congratulations on your marriage. We should just
Well, thank you. It was
say that on the air.
I think 9 months ago we got married.
Yeah, fantastic. Can just kind of this language thing. We were talking a little bit about Noam Chomsky. You mentioned Lila Gleitman, we're huge fans of Lila's work.
Oh, Lila's wonderful.
Yeah. We actually worked very, very hard to get an interviewer with her before she passed away and missed the window. But when I was reading through that, it reminded me a little bit of like this, again, thinking about language specifically, it reminded me of the Yogi Berra quote about principle and practice. Are you familiar with this? Where he says, in principle, principle and practice are very much the same, but in practice, they're very different. Of course. But you talk about infinite and finite. Is language infinite in principle, but finite in practice?
Yeah, I think that's the right way to look at it. I know there's some sort of skeptical scientists who don't like to think of it that way, but language is infinite in principle in that we could always construct a longer sentence. You come to me with what you think is the longest sentence in the world, and then I add in front of it, this guy told me, and now it's bigger. and there's no rule stomping. And that says something interesting about you have this system in the head that uses rules, recursion, that could generate an infinity of sentences. Numbers, similarly, finite. You have your 9-year-old very excited, and I've talked to kids that I've discovered the biggest number. And then you say, we could add a million to the beginning of it. You go, wow. And then there's often this epiphany. This never stops. So it's this astonishing thing about the powers of the mind that we use infinite systems in the head. But of course, we're finite beings.
Yeah.
There's certainly a longest sentence I'm ever going to be able to say before I die. Life is short. A longest number I could ever recount. So this is the way Chomsky, you talk about Chomsky talks about competence, which is in some way the capacities that language actually bestows you in an abstract way, versus performance, which is what you can do with the language. Competence is infinite. Performance is incredibly finite.
You have a chapter in the book called A Good Life, which is fantastic.
Thank you.
So what is the secret to a good life? What does the research show? We have the psychological answer here to a good life. What is it?
So part of the answer is I can tell you, because the answer to what a good life is falls outside the scope of psychology, because it ends up being sort of a moral and philosophical question. If one of you says a good life is a life of pleasure, just pure pleasure, no pain, pleasure. Another one says, no, a good life is a life of doing good things, helping out others. And then a third person says, a good life is a life of struggle, long, meaningful activities. It's not for me as a psychologist to say, I'm going to run an experiment and say which one of you is right. This is a question that goes outside experiments. Not everything is a science. What psychology can tell you is that if you want to maximize certain things, you've decided to maximize certain things, here's how to get there, just through experiment. So a lot of people, fairly enough, want to be happy.
Yeah.
And happiness has different meanings, but roughly they want to have a good time. They want to look back and say, I'm living a happy life. And we know some things that contribute to happiness. Some things are not surprising. Money contributes to happiness. I used to give lectures a long time ago. I'm embarrassed where I said it wasn't that connected because that's what people were telling me. But of course money makes you happy because money buys you healthcare, safety for your children, a roof over your head, good food, travel, security. At a certain point, there's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
It's not clear you could buy much more of 2 million than 1 million. In a way, it don't matter, but money matters. What matters more is social connectedness.
Yeah.
Friends, family, people who love you, people who you love. Loneliness is horrible. Loneliness has savage effects on your mind and your body. A recent science paper estimated that loneliness causes more harm to the body than obesity and smoking. It's just, and to the soul, it's ravaging. But you already knew that.
Yeah.
Some countries are happier than others this in turn is related to money and social connections and so on. But there are some surprises. I'll tell you one surprise, which as I get older, I like more and more. You ask people, what's the relation between happiness and getting old? And they'll often tell you, you get happy, you get old, your 20s and your 30s, you're really happy. Then you just decline as you get older and older. You get weaker, you get more sick, you get less social status. Turns out that's totally wrong.
Yeah.
The evidence suggests that with age, happiness is a U-shaped curve. Pretty much on average, people differ, but on average, people are pretty happy in their 20s and 30s and 40s. Then it starts to dip. And the saddest part of life for most people, many people at least, is mid-50s. Then it goes up, until for many people, not all, but many, the happiest times in their lives are in their 80s. And it's only up until the point when there's serious health problems that the happiness starts to drop. But old age is really freaking happy on average. And it's kind of a mystery. It's not what you would predict on first principles.
Yeah.
Your old age, your body's not doing too well.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not doing too well in some ways that cause you discomfort and pain.
Yeah.
You have to go to the bathroom 7 times a night. Your foot hurts when you walk. Your social status has dropped. You're walking down the streets and attractive people don't kind of eye you over and everything anymore. You become a little bit invisible to people. You go into too many rooms where you're the oldest person in the room. That should hurt too.
Yeah.
Strangely, it doesn't. And one theory is that you hit a certain point in life, you start seeking out other goods. Goods that go beyond status, that go beyond money, that go beyond on sexual conquest, but goods that involve loving family relationships, satisfaction that people around you are doing well, the ability to support other people's lives, abilities to get good at different things in a sort of different way than you did when you were young.
Yeah. So
I find that kind of cool.
That is very cool. So Tim, you got that going for you, so there you go. You're getting old.
Being the oldest guy in the room,
that we're all getting old.
Yeah, I'm just sitting there going, all right, I'm in my mid 50s right now, so this is my low point.
This is your low point. You're at the.
I'm
just kind of crawling out. You're a little bit happier each day. I got the graph on my wall. I said, yeah, I'm going to go.
Well, it's good to know it goes up. I mean, I'm actually feeling like I'm pretty happy. So I'm going, all right, yeah. I'm looking forward to my next couple decades here. So there you go.
That's good.
Paul, I know Tim is itching to get to some music questions. So I'm gonna preclude that though with one last question, because I thought it was really interesting. And this was a term I hadn't heard before from the book. You write about a condition identified as hypophobia, the lack of fear. Is that? Yeah. So that's be prominent in stunt doubles, professionals like that. And then you also mentioned a little bit about politics. And so bringing up a component of modern day life here is it similar to like feeling of shame and not having shame? Like in a world of George Santos and Donald Trump, are we seeing more people with this hypophobia kind of lack of any sense of shame in their beliefs? It's
interesting. We talked at the very beginning about the right way to think about emotions.
Yeah.
And how to think about emotions. And some people hear words like anxiety, fear, and they said, oh my God, they're terrible.
Yeah.
But the evolutionary psychologist Randolph Nesse points out that we don't only see it this way, but too little anxiety and fear can be just as bad. He said people with anxiety and fear too much, they tend to be in psychiatrist office and clinics. People with too little anxiety and fear, they tend to be in jails and morgues. It seems like fun to be fearless, walking through the most dangerous neighbors, not feeling afraid at all. But until something happens, you realize I should have been a bit more afraid.
Yeah.
There was a big talk, a big presentation, and I prepped my ass off because I was really anxious about it. You didn't do any of it because you're cool as a cucumber. But then you maybe on stage, you think, maybe I should have done a bit more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worry about my kids a lot and take care of them. You don't worry about them a lot. But maybe you're worrying too little and things go bad. So that's the story.
Yeah.
And the point is there's a right degree of calibration. When it comes to political leaders and, charismatic leaders, gurus and everything, they do seem to be wired up more than the rest of us. And a lot of them are, I think, fairly low anxiety, fairly low fear, fairly low conscientiousness. And I think they tend to lead high variance lives where if done correctly, if the gods smile on them, they could end up becoming presidents, becoming dictators. They could end up internet gurus, people of great power because of their traits. But they also become fairly more likely to end up in prison, end up deep and destitute failures. They tend to get into a lot of trouble. And we have a kind of survivorship bias thing where you say, oh, look at this guy. Look at he's president now. He's so great. And not realizing that he came this close to ending up his life in federal prison in this way. And so some of us play it a bit more safe.
Yeah. I love this discussion, Paul. This is absolutely so much fun for us. And it is that point in time when I need to start talking a little bit about music. I need to ask you about your musical preferences when it would come to your imaginary 1 year on a desert island. Let's say you get exiled to a desert island. Let's say it's a pleasant exile, not an unpleasant exile. And you've got a year on that desert island, and you can only take 2 musical artists' catalogs with you. You can take the whole catalog. You don't have to, it's not one song, but what 2 musical artists would you take with you?
You warned me about the Coke versus Pepsi question.
I forgot about this from our first round.
I forgot about this one. And I remember I did so badly because I totally failed to think of anybody who's a musician, which is very unusual.
Sorry. It's not intended to be a stump that,
I know because most people do fine on this. But I listen to a lot of music. But typically I listen to a lot of music because when I'm working, I have music in the background. And what I have is classical covers of popular songs. A friend introduced me to something called lo-fi, which is another way to sort of transform music. I listen to soundtracks of video games. I listen to soundtracks of movies and TV shows I like. I just watched The White Lotus season 2, and they have a beautiful soundtrack. I listen to that. Yeah. So I'm listening to music without words. Getting a real pleasure from it, but not appreciating as music, but as background. So if it was a matter of being on an island, but I have my laptop there and a good screen, I would bring more of that. I'd bring violin string quartet, all their covers and stuff like that. More in the spirit of what you're asking, and this is really going to age me. I'd be going for musicians like Elton John and David Bowie. I just took my wife for her birthday to Elton John's last concert in Toronto. And I know these guys always say it's their last concert, but that was really nice.
This might be it for Elton. Yeah,
the last.
That's what he said.
Last concert.
We'll see. She has a birthday next year, and we'll see where that goes. But I like musicians like Tracy Chapman and Joan Armatrading and Suzanne Vega. I don't even know what category they fall into, but I find myself just basically listening to them. So I think I'm aging myself in a certain way, but that's fine.
You fit right in with Tim and all of his musical preferences. There you go. So
yeah, and it fits perfectly with all that research, that says that we kind of lock into our favorite music sometime for boys between 13 and 16.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So for me, another answer would just be a lot of classic rock. Yeah. I don't know if I want to spend my time on an island with Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd. I think for a while I'm going to get a little bit sick of it. But
yeah, I love Pink Floyd, but holy cow, if I had a whole year of Pink Floyd, I'd just kill myself. I mean,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, right. You wouldn't want to grow older to that happiness. There you go. So.
No, my happiness would stay at the bottom and kind of just hang there.
Paul Bloom, it is always a pleasure to see you, and today was just fantastic. Thank you for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves again.
Thank you so much for having me on. Have me back. This was tons of fun.
Welcome to the Grooving Session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from part 2 of our discussion with Paul, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our psychology brain. I don't know. That was a bad.
Do that again. You can do so much better than
that. Groove on whatever else comes into our psych brain. I am. So, all right. So think about this.
Good life. How about?
You do it, Mister. You do it, Mr. Houlihan. You
selfish
come up
versus
with
altruistic.
Whatever comes into our
nature versus nurture. Oh, it's all good. It's all good.
Oh, all right. 350 some episodes later, and I'm still struggling with how this all happens. But we got it. So. Hopefully you have listened to both episodes, but if not, if you just listened to part 2, that's fine as well. I think what we're going to talk about here, Tim, I just found it fascinating. First off, that, all right, this was going to be an easy book for him to write. I love this idea. Oh, I'm just going to take this class that I have, transcribe the notes, edit it a little bit, and just put it out there for everybody.
Bada bing, bada boom, book on the way. Not.
Kind of like us, kind of like the book that we've been writing for 4 years. Like, oh, this is easy. We got all this great content and we're just going to take it and good idea and boom, bang, it's done. Oh, it's been 4 years and we.
Well, aside from planning fallacy aside, I take some solace in a conversation that Dave Letterman had with Bono and The Edge recently. And Letterman said, you've been sitting on this one song for 10 years. Why haven't you just finished it? Because it's because Bono and The Edge play it for Letterman. And Bono just says, sometimes it just takes time. Sometimes it's where we are in our lives that actually helps contribute to, is something finished? Because we have a perspective. And I think that Paul didn't say that specifically, but it kind of felt like he just needed time to kind of work through it. And then, of course, he writes 400,000 words and, to condense it down to 40,000. He didn't say that either, but it sounded like he had a major, contraction in editing to get it down to something that was more manageable.
Well, and what's also interesting in this is just this idea that the content within the class has to be truncated because of the dynamics of the class. You have an hour-long lecture and you have to put things in, and you have 12 of those or however many of those 16 that you have throughout the semester. And the idea that this is much broader and he can go deeper in this, which he did, which I find, which is really rewarding. So fantastic stuff on that. So where do you want to start? Where do you want to start on part 2, Mr. Houlihan?
Well, like my favorite part of the conversation was nature versus nurture.
Oh, of course it was, because you asked the question. All right.
But it's also that philosophical side. And you and I have talked about how I tend to lead toward the philosophical, not quite as much as you do, but
No. Stop, reverse that, and then go, you do it like way more than me. You like the philosophical question, that idea of nature versus nurture. Do we have free will? So, all right.
Yeah.
After this conversation, is the nature versus nurture debate settled in your mind?
Done. Yeah. Wrapped up, put a bow on it, put it on. No.
Oh, man, I thought you were being seriously there.
No. I rather like the gray area right now. Because where I'm at right now is in the middling part of thinking that there are nature things that influence us and there are nurture things that influence us.
Well, isn't that isn't that settled? I mean, this is the part that I think is settled, is that it isn't either or.
It's not. Okay, I'm settled on that. I mean, so if someone claims, no, we're born this way and that's it. Who was it? John Locke was like, you can't be the same person that you were 10 years ago because A, you can't remember it. And by the way, you really were a different person because of the environment, things like that.
Can't step into the same stream twice, right?
You can't. Exactly. So, okay. that context matters. It does. I still deeply believe that. To what degree nature influences us versus nurture influencing us, I think is I don't feel like there's a conclusion on that, and that's where I'm in the middling area. It's like,
okay.
I'd like to feel more settled on what aspects can I sort of count on. Well, this is just me, because when I get aggravated at somebody cutting me off, driving down the freeway, can I just write that up to, well, it just pissed me off, and so I have every right to do whatever I do? Or is that like that's a result of culture and family and how I grew up and how I perceive the world, and I can change that? Well,
cutting people off in freeway is just a nature thing because everybody gets pissed at that. So that's universal. It's interesting. I always go back to one of your and my favorite books, Behave by Robert Sapolsky. And when he talks about this, the biological component of this, and goes back and says, look, our behavior is driven by choices our ancestors made millennial ago. And then it gets into, all the way up to our grandparents and our parents. And then it gets into the genes that we have. And then it gets to the womb and how, the what's going on in the environment around your mother when your embryo is growing within the womb, and then different genes get expressed, and then upon birth, and then the social component of everything that you're doing, and even some of the environmental factors that again influence the genes. So genes have an influence, but they can be expressed or not expressed because of environmental or social factors. Exactly. And so, there's influence, but then there's, so again, it's not an either or, and it's not even this, they play off of each other and they build. So if you have a certain gene and you encounter a certain social environment, that means one thing for you versus me with a different genetic makeup and the same social environment. I might respond differently, but it could be different because of how my mother, what she was smoking in the womb versus not. And, all of those factors. And again, I don't think that part has been settled.
Yeah. So a shout out to Sapolsky's book.
Oh my God.
That's
great book.
It's fantastic. And just to continue down that road, Sapolsky also gets into so we've got a millennium ahead of where we are at this moment, to hundreds of years, generations, to just before we were born, to years before today, to months before today, to hours before today, to moments before what's happening right now. And I mean, he makes a compelling case. He absolutely makes a compelling case that all of these things are contriving, to work, or conspiring to work sort of with us and against us at the same time, basically.
And again, I am waiting for his next book, the one that's supposed to be about free will. That
he just needs to finish it,
Well, he says, hopefully he'll have an interview with us once he finishes it. So he's bowed out a couple times because he's too busy.
It's not done.
But we'll keep working. Anybody that knows him, please tell him we really want to interview him, and it'll be a fun break. It'll give his mind. There's research that shows you need to sometimes take a break from things, and so he can take a break with us, and then he can get back to writing his book and actually probably be more productive.
Okay, back to Paul. Back to our super cool conversation about again, I don't think there's anything else to say on nature versus nurture. For me, I'm still exploring the balance of the two, right? It's both.
Yeah.
Agreed. But I'm still exploring the balance and what parts of my life am I just going to write off and say, that's my damn genes versus no, this is environmental. I can change this. That's kind of part of it. Okay. Kurt, what really struck you in our conversation with Paul?
Can I say two things?
You can say two things.
Okay, so let me go first. Finest instincts. Our finest instincts can't happen without the basest of our instincts. This idea that we are good and positive versus negative. This idea that we're selfish creatures And yet we're also really good creatures, and that part I think is really fascinating to me.
Duly noted. Let's just say that, duly noted. It is pretty great, actually. What was your number 2 thing?
We're not going to talk about that. They're just like bowing that off. All right, fine, fine. We'll get into the stuff. So again, we talked earlier. You're this philosophical, like this big picture thing. I like these, like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And this idea of the happiness or the good life that we have. And I love this idea that, hey, there are certain things that we can do that research has shown, that psychology has shown. Psychology can't define what a good life is, right? That's outside of the scope of psychology, as Paul says. But if you want certain things, here's how you might get them. And some of those happiness aspects, right? This idea of contentment and hedonic aspects that, all right, money matters. The more money we have, the happier we are. But similar to our conversation with Eric Anger, right? This idea that there's diminishing returns on money, that $10,000 for somebody making $40,000 can make a big impact on their life.
Big impact. Yeah,
$10,000 for somebody making $2 million is like, I lose that on, in my laundry, right? So
that's a weird idea.
Don't you just leave that, $10,000 in your pocket as you go through the laundry, and then you just lose it all in change?
That's a fantastic image. Okay.
But the piece that, again, research is showing that social connectedness, this idea that social connections and feeling this social bond with others is really key to our overall life satisfaction.
I'm glad you focus on that, because I think we miss out on that. It certainly came to light during the pandemic, when people are working at home, when they're quarantined, and sort of the stress that came about because of that. It became abundantly obvious that the social nature of our humanness is critical. And I think that this actually does play into the discussion about mental illness and about the future of the field. That the social connectedness, I don't think has been really fully explored. I think that there's more opportunity for us to study the impacts of what it means to actually be socially connected to people in real ways, not just social media, not these artificial ways, right?
Yeah.
Social media.
We got to try to get Robert Waldinger, from the Harvard Life Lesson. He did the TED Talk and wrote looked at all that research from the Harvard study, the longest running social psychology study started in the 30s and is now still going. But we need to get him on the thing to study this. But I think it's really interesting. The danger of loneliness that Paul talks about, and how that leads into all of these things, as you mentioned, and mental illness and all of that are fantastic. But also what was really interesting is the fact that as we get older, we become happier. And that I'm at the low spot, supposedly, on the life continuum. And so my life is only going to get better from here. Now, you're already experiencing that betterness. You're older than me, just pointing that out for our listeners in case they don't know.
Well, older and more mature and
wiser. You are definitely wiser. Yeah,
but not better looking. So
so I got that going for me, right? Yeah, there you go. I think it's really interesting. And so again, although I will have to say, you talked about like maybe some of the social media stuff and loneliness. I think if you had conversations with us listeners through social media and talking about these topics, that would assuage some of that loneliness. Well, and this is the other, I'm sorry, I'm being kind of facetious there, but actually not, because one of the things that we do know from some of the more recent research is it's not just those deep connections that we need those peripheral connections, that the more that we talk to the barista, the more that we talk as we've had conversations, like the people on the train that we're riding into work with, the people on the airplane next to us, those actually add to our general benefit. And those conversations that you have on social media, the realness of those, as long as they're not, the false kind, but, getting into real components can add to that, right? We've made friends with Christian Hunt and others, that have been purely virtual up until we get to meet them. And those add to the well-being that we have throughout our lives. Jez Groom, all sorts of people that we've had and built friendships up that we can say we've built friendships up over social media. So
Fadi Maki, how about that? Allison Zelkowitz.
People we've interviewed on the show, many of them were friends because of social media and the connections we had. Yeah.
We finally get to meet them, and it's kind of explosive. It's kind of just this really wonderful emotional payoff to say, oh, this is what it's like to be with you in person. How fun is that?
Yeah. Everybody except for Christian Hunt has been amazing. It's been just fantastic. And then, that's kind of a letdown but for Christian. But sorry, Christian, just joking. You know that. Everybody else would just know he's fantastic. Blew me away when we got to meet him in person.
He's so damn smart and so fun. Okay.
All right. So that wraps up part 2 of our 2-part episode with Paul Bloom. So make sure that you tune in next week to hear even more great insights on behavioral science from some other fascinating guests that we will have on.
Yes. And Groovers, so be social. And increase your happiness by joining us in the conversation. Please. I mean, Kurt really teed up a really great idea here. So it can be around this episode or any other ideas you've got about behavioral science. Follow us on Twitter. I mean, again, we're not in it for fortune. We're in it for fame.
Fame and not even fame. We're in it to build connections and to share the insights and to find people who are interested in this so that we can have those conversations. I mean, we started this up as a meetup to have those connections, that networking piece to say, what do you think? How are you using this? What does this make sense to you? Help me understand this. And from your perspective, those are the types of conversations that we want to have.
And we know that you, as a listener, you're a bold person. You are a commenter. You're a social person. You are a socializer. How else can I verbalize? You're
trying to make this concrete. I can tell.
I am. And just, you can do it. You can be the commenter. You are the commenter, the socializer, the idea generator. Be that with us. Be that. Share that with us and the community on Twitter.
Yeah. So with that, go out this week, find some happiness by connecting with us on social media and holding a conversation and finding your groove.